The voice on the recording was mine, slurred and angry, saying things I barely remembered from that wine-soaked night 3 months ago. Things about my boss, about company funds, about plans that could destroy everything I'd built. My best friend Lorraine sat across from me at the cafe table, her phone face up between us, her finger hovering over the play button with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. The lunch crowd buzzed around us, oblivious to the fact that my entire life was crumbling into dust. I appreciate you taking the time to listen to my story today. I am curious, what part of the world are you tuning in from? Drop your city in the comments below. All right, let us dive into what happened to me. My coffee cup rattled against the saucer as I set it down, brown liquid sloshing over the rim onto my trembling fingers. The recording kept playing, my voice confessing fears and frustrations I'd shared only with her, twisted now into something sinister. Heat crawled up my neck as nearby diners glanced our way. "Turn it off," I whispered, my jaw so tight the words barely escaped. Lorraine's manicured nail tapped the screen. Silence fell like a guillotine blade. She leaned back in her chair, crossing her legs with deliberate slowness, her designer handbag shifting on her lap. The autumn sunlight streaming through the window caught the diamond studs in her ears, gifts I'd given her last Christmas. $50,000, June. Her voice carried the same warm tone she'd used for 15 years of friendship, now wrapped around cold steel. "That's all I need. Your promotion came through, didn't it? You can spare it." My hands clenched into fists beneath the table, nails digging crescents into my palms. The bistro's garlic and basil smells turned sour in my stomach. I watched her face, searching for some crack in the mask, some hint of the woman who'd held my hand through my divorce, who'd stayed up all night when my mother died. Nothing. Just polished makeup and calculated indifference. I pushed back from the table, chair legs scraping against tile. Other patrons turned to stare. My purse strap caught on the armrest, and I yanked it free with enough force that my keys scattered across the floor. Bending to retrieve them, blood rushed to my head, and for a moment the black and white checkered tiles swam before my eyes. "You have 48 hours, Lorraine said, picking up her latte as if we'd been discussing the weather. I straightened, keys clutched so hard they bit into my skin. My legs felt disconnected from my body as I moved toward the exit, weaving between tables. Behind me, I heard her phone buzz, probably already planning how to spend my money. The glass door felt heavy as I pushed through it into the October air. The sidewalk tilted beneath my feet as I stumbled away from the bistro. My shoulder collided with a parking meter, the cold metal jarring me back to awareness. Coffee shops and boutiques blurred past as I walked, somewhere, anywhere, away from Lorraine's calculating smile. My phone vibrated in my coat pocket. I pulled it out with trembling fingers. An audio file, already downloaded to my messages. Against every instinct screaming at me to delete it, I pressed play. My own voice poured through the tiny speaker, tinny but unmistakable. The audit reports were doctored. I knew about it for months before I said anything. The words I'd spoken 6 months ago in Lorraine's kitchen, wine-drunk and desperate for someone to understand the impossible position my company had put me in. I jabbed the phone off and shoved it deep into my pocket. A man in a business suit swerved around me with an annoyed grunt. I'd stopped dead in the middle of the sidewalk, other pedestrians flowing around me like water around a stone. My car sat 3 blocks away. Each step felt like wading through concrete. The leather portfolio under my arm, filled with quarterly reports I was supposed to review this afternoon, weighed 1,000 pounds. I shifted it to my other arm and kept moving. At the intersection, I waited for the light to change. My reflection stared back at me from a shop window. Gray blazer wrinkled from clenching my arms too tight. Lipstick worn off. Hair escaping from its usually neat bun. 55 years old, and I looked 70. The parking garage smelled like oil and exhaust. My heels echoed off concrete walls as I climbed to the third level. My hands shook so badly it took 3 tries to get the key fob pointed at my sedan. The locks clicked open with a chirp that bounced off the low ceiling. Inside, I gripped the steering wheel and forced myself to breathe. In through the nose, out through the mouth. My therapist's voice from years ago, teaching me how to handle divorce-related panic attacks. This felt worse somehow. Divorce was public, messy, but at least it was honest. I pulled out my phone again and opened my contacts. My thumb hovered over my lawyer's number. Marcus Chen had handled my divorce with ruthless efficiency. But what could I even tell him? That I'd been stupid enough to trust someone? That I'd confessed to knowledge of corporate fraud, not participation, but knowledge. And now those words existed in digital form? The audit situation had resolved itself months ago. The executives responsible had been fired. The company had paid fines. I'd kept my job because I'd eventually reported what I knew, even though staying silent those first few months, while I gathered evidence, could be spun into complicity by the right prosecutor. Or by Lorraine, apparently. I dropped the phone into the cup holder and started the engine. The dashboard clock read 2:47 p.m. 48 hours from our meeting meant Saturday evening. 2 days to come up with $50,000 or watch my career implode. Traffic crawled down Market Street. I drummed my fingers against the wheel at every red light. My wedding ring, I'd never bothered taking it off after the divorce, clicking against the leather. The sound matched my racing pulse. My apartment building rose 15 stories against the afternoon sky. I parked in my assigned spot and sat for a moment, staring at the concrete pillar marked with my unit number. The building had seemed like such a victory when I'd moved in 3 years ago. Post-divorce independence, my own space. Now it just felt like another thing Lorraine could take from me. The elevator ride to the 9th floor lasted an eternity. A young couple got on at the 5th floor, laughing about something on his phone. They fell silent when they saw my face. I watched the numbers climb and refused to meet their eyes in the mirrored walls. My apartment door stuck the way it always did. I put my shoulder into it and stumbled inside when it finally gave. The portfolio slipped from under my arm and hit the hardwood floor, papers sliding out across the entryway. I left them there and walked to the kitchen. My hands moved on autopilot, filling the kettle, setting it on the stove. While water heated, I stared at the herb garden on my windowsill. Basil, thyme, rosemary, all thriving under my careful attention. Lorraine had helped me plant them last spring, her hands in the soil beside mine. The kettle screamed. I jerked back from the stove and killed the heat, then stood there breathing hard while steam rose between us like a ghost. I poured the boiling water over a tea bag I didn't remember placing in the mug. Chamomile scent rose with the steam, supposedly calming. My stomach remained a knot of barbed wire. The living room curtains hung open, exposing my space to the neighboring building. I crossed to them and yanked them shut with enough force that the rod rattled. Dust motes swirled in the diminishing light. My phone sat on the coffee table where I'd thrown it earlier, screen dark and innocent-looking. I picked it up and opened my recent calls. Lorraine's name appeared 17 times in the past week. I scrolled back further. 43 calls over the past month. My thumb hovered over her contact information. The urge to delete her completely made my hand shake. But evidence. I needed to keep everything. The tea burned my tongue when I took a sip. I set it down hard enough that brown liquid sloshed onto the glass table. My laptop sat closed on the desk in the corner, and I moved toward it like a sleepwalker. The screen flashed to life under my fingers. I typed "Extortion Laws, Illinois" into the search bar. The results loaded: criminal defense attorneys, legal aid sites, articles about blackmail victims. I clicked through them with sweaty fingers, leaving marks on the trackpad. Most recommended going to the police immediately. Some warned about the psychological damage of giving in to blackmailers. Too late for that advice. My email inbox showed 47 unread messages. I scanned the sender names, looking for anything that might be relevant. Work notifications, newsletter subscriptions, a message from my sister that I'd been avoiding for 3 days. Nothing from Lorraine. She was too smart to leave a written trail. The desk drawer stuck when I pulled it. I yanked harder, and it came free with a screech of wood on wood. Inside, beneath expired warranties and instruction manuals, I found the small leather journal I'd kept during my divorce proceedings. My lawyer had suggested documenting everything. Good advice then. Good advice now. I flipped to a blank page near the back. My pen hovered over the paper, while I tried to organize the chaos in my head into something linear and factual. April 3rd. Lorraine first mentions the recordings. Says she was worried about my stress levels, wanted to help me process. My handwriting looked jagged. I pressed harder, the pen digging into the paper. April 10th. She jokes about having dirt on me. I laugh it off. She says she has hours of audio. April 17th. First real threat. She needs money for her business. Says certain people would be interested in what I've said about the nursing home where I work. My hand cramped. I flexed my fingers and kept writing. April 24th. Demands $5,000. Says it's a loan. Says she'll delete everything after. I believe her. The pen cap clicked between my teeth as I stared at what I'd written. 17 days between the first threat and the payment. How had I convinced myself this would end? My phone buzzed against the table. I grabbed it before my brain could process the movement. A text from an unknown number. You looked nice today. Blue really suits you. Ice water dumped down my spine. I'd worn a blue cardigan to work. I stood and moved to the window, pushing the curtain aside just enough to see the street below. Cars lined both sides. People walked past, heads down against the wind. Any one of them could be watching. I dropped the curtain and backed away. My shoulders hit the wall harder than intended, and the framed photo next to me rattled. My breathing came too fast. I counted to 4 on each inhale, held, counted to 4 on each exhale. The phone buzzed again. Relax. Just letting you know I'm thinking about you. My fingers flew over the screen. Who is this? The response came immediately. You know exactly who this is. Check your bank account. I opened my banking app with trembling hands. The screen loaded slowly, each second stretching. My checking account balance appeared, $247.63. Yesterday it had been $3,847.63, another withdrawal. Another $2,600 gone. I hadn't authorized anything. I changed my password 2 days ago. My debit card sat in my wallet on the counter where I could see it. The phone rang in my hand, and I nearly dropped it. Not the unknown number. This time, it showed Lorraine on the screen. I stared at it through 4 rings before answering. Did you take money from my account? June. Her voice carried that familiar warm tone, the one she'd used when we'd stayed up late talking about our dreams, our fears, our secrets. You gave me your account information last month, remember? You said I could help myself if I ever needed anything. I never said that. You did, sweetie. I have the recording. My free hand clenched into a fist against my thigh. Nails bit into my palm. I'm going to the police. She laughed, soft and almost pitying. With what evidence? That you voluntarily gave your best friend access to your money? That you told her all about how you've been skimming supplies from work? How you falsified patient records? I never. You did. And I have proof. The line went dead. I drove to Lorraine's apartment in a blur of rage and panic. My knuckles had gone white around the steering wheel. Every stoplight felt like an eternity. The afternoon sun beat down through the windshield, turning the interior into an oven. But I barely noticed the sweat sliding down my spine. Her building loomed ahead. Red brick, 3 stories, the window boxes she'd planted last spring now overgrown with dead petals. I parked crookedly across 2 spaces and slammed the car door hard enough to make a couple walking past flinch. The concrete steps to her second-floor unit felt too narrow, too steep. My work shoes scuffed against each riser. The door stood slightly ajar when I reached it. No sound came from inside. I pushed it open with 2 fingers, and it swung inward on hinges that needed oil. They squeaked like something dying. Lorraine. No answer. I stepped inside. The living room looked exactly as it had 3 weeks ago when I'd last visited. Same worn couch with the floral pattern. Same stack of fashion magazines on the coffee table. Same framed photos of us from better times on the mantel. But the air felt different. Stale. Wrong. My phone sat on the coffee table. Not my current phone. My old one. The one I'd given Lorraine 6 months ago when I upgraded. The screen was cracked across the corner, and someone had plugged it into a laptop that lay open beside it. Files covered the laptop screen. Audio files, dozens of them. Each labeled with a date and location. June's house, kitchen from April. Riverside Diner, booth 3 from May. June's car from last Tuesday. I grabbed the old phone. The screen lit up under my thumb. A recording app sat open, still running, red dot pulsing. Recording this moment. Recording me standing here in her apartment. Footsteps sounded behind me, heavy. Not Lorraine's light step in her ballet flats. These were boots, work boots. I spun around. A man filled the doorway. Tall, maybe 6'2", with shoulders that barely fit through the frame. His face had the kind of weathered look that came from too many years in the sun. Deep lines carved around his eyes and mouth. Gray stubble covered his jaw. He wore a security uniform, not a mall cop outfit, but the real kind with patches and a badge that looked official. "You're June Butler." It wasn't a question. His voice came out gravel rough, like he gargled with broken glass every morning. He stepped inside and closed the door behind him. The lock clicked. "Where's Lorraine?" "Busy." He moved toward me, each step deliberate. His hand rested on something at his belt. Not a gun, a radio. "She said you'd probably show up. Said you had a temper." I backed up until my legs hit the coffee table. The laptop wobbled. My old phone was still clutched in my hand, still recording everything. "You're helping her." "I'm doing a job." He pulled out his radio, thumb hovering over the talk button. "She's got documentation on you going back 9 months. Financial fraud, theft from your employer, some interesting conversations about falsifying medical records at the nursing home. Those recordings were taken without my consent, without my knowledge. One-party consent state." He smiled, showing teeth that had probably been white once but had yellowed with age and coffee. "As long as one person in the conversation knows it's being recorded, it's perfectly legal. And your friend Lorraine knew." The laptop screen changed. A new window opened. Video this time. Security camera footage from inside a building I recognized immediately. The staff break room at Meadowview Nursing Home where I'd worked for 15 years. The timestamp showed last Thursday. On screen, I watched myself pocket 2 bottles of medication from the supply cabinet. Watched myself alter a patient file on the computer. None of it real. None of it something I'd actually done. That's fabricated. Tell it to the judge. He lifted the radio. You want to do this the easy way or the hard way? My fingers found the edge of the laptop. In one motion, I grabbed it and swung it at his head. The corner caught him above the left eye. Blood bloomed instantly, running down his face in a thick rivulet. He stumbled backward, hand dropping the radio to press against the wound. I ran for the door, still holding the laptop and phone. My shoulder hit the frame on the way out. Pain shot down my arm, but I kept moving. The stairs blurred beneath my feet. 2 steps, 3, then I jumped the rest, landing hard enough to jar my teeth. Behind me, his boots thundered on the landing. He was yelling something. Words I couldn't make out over the blood pounding in my ears. I sprinted across the parking lot. My car keys were already in my hand. How had I been smart enough to keep them ready? The car door opened. I threw myself inside, tossed the laptop and phone onto the passenger seat, jammed the key into the ignition. The engine caught on the second try. Tires squealed as I reversed, then squealed again as I shifted into drive. In the rearview mirror, the man stood in the parking lot, blood still streaming down his face, his radio pressed to his mouth. Calling someone. Calling Lorraine, probably, or worse, calling real police, reporting this as a break-in, as assault. My hands shook so badly I could barely keep the wheel straight. The laptop on the passenger seat had cracked open from the impact, its screen shattered into a spiderweb pattern. But it was still on, still glowing. And somewhere in those files might be the only evidence I had that this entire nightmare was a setup. I drove for 20 minutes before my breathing slowed enough to think clearly. The laptop screen flickered intermittently, throwing blue light across my face each time it pulsed back to life. My knuckles ached from gripping the steering wheel. When I finally loosened my grip, they left damp prints on the leather. A rest stop appeared ahead, one of those decrepit places off Highway 87 that nobody used except truckers and people running from something. I pulled into the farthest parking spot from the single overhead light. The engine ticked as it cooled. Blood from my scraped palms had smeared across the steering wheel, mixing with sweat. The laptop opened with resistance, its broken hinges grinding. The screen flickered 3 times before stabilizing. I pressed the power button, waited through the startup sequence. No password protection. Lorraine's hired muscle wasn't the brightest. Files and folders covered the desktop in chaotic rows. I clicked on the first folder labeled JB Audio. My own voice filled the car. Can't believe she'd do this to me after everything we've been through. The recording was from 3 weeks ago. That conversation in my kitchen, when I'd confided in Lorraine about Marcus Chen, my financial advisor who'd been skimming from my accounts. Except in this version, something was wrong. The pauses were different. My words seemed to loop back on themselves. I clicked to the next file. My voice again. I don't care what happens to him. He deserves whatever he gets. But I'd never said that. Never. I remembered that conversation. I'd said, I hope he gets what he deserves. Meaning legal consequences, justice. Not violence. Not the implied threat this recording suggested. My stomach lurched. I scrolled through the folder. 43 audio files. 43 edited, spliced, manipulated recordings of conversations I'd had with Lorraine over the past 6 months. Someone had cut my words, rearranged them, created entirely new sentences from fragments of real ones. The car door beside me exploded inward. Glass showered across my lap, across the laptop, across everything. A hand grabbed my jacket, yanked me sideways. My head cracked against the doorframe. Stars burst across my vision. The laptop tumbled to the floorboard, its broken screen going dark. I twisted, threw my elbow back, connected with something soft, a grunt. The grip loosened. I kicked backward with both feet, felt my heel sink into flesh. Then I was scrambling across the center console, clawing for the passenger door handle. The man from the warehouse, face still crusted with drying blood, lunged across the driver's seat. His fingers caught my ankle. I kicked again, harder. My shoe came off in his hand. I tumbled out the passenger side, hit the pavement hard enough to knock the wind from my lungs. Rolling. Had to keep rolling. Gravel scraped my back through my shirt. I got to my knees, then my feet. The parking lot spun. Blood roared in my ears. The man was already out of the car, circling around the hood. But he wasn't alone now. A black sedan sat 15 feet away, engine running, headlights cutting through the darkness. The driver's door opened. Lorraine stepped out, her heels clicking on the pavement with precise measured steps. She wore the same cream-colored pantsuit she'd worn to lunch last Tuesday, when we'd laughed about her mother's terrible bridge club. When I'd trusted her with everything. "You shouldn't have run, June." Her voice carried across the distance, calm and controlled. This could have been so much simpler. I backed toward the tree line behind the rest stop. My stockinged foot slipped on loose gravel. The man from the warehouse moved left, cutting off that angle. Another figure emerged from the sedan's passenger side. A woman I'd never seen before, tall and angular, wearing dark clothes that blended with the night. 3 against 1. My phone was still in the car. The laptop was in the car. Everything was in the car. Lorraine took another step forward. "The recordings are already with the police. Marcus Chen filed a restraining order this morning. Your threatening messages, your harassment, all documented." She smiled then, a cold expression that belonged to someone I'd never really known. "You threatened his life, June, multiple times, on tape. Edited tapes." My voice came out hoarse. "Manipulated." "Prove it." The tree line was 10 feet away. Dense Georgia pine, thick underbrush. If I could reach it, if I could disappear into that darkness. I ran. Footsteps pounded behind me. Lorraine shouted something. The tall woman was fast, her footfalls gaining. I crashed through the first line of trees, branches whipping across my face. Roots grabbed at my feet. My lungs burned. The darkness swallowed everything except the sounds of pursuit, breaking branches, harsh breathing, the occasional curse when someone stumbled. A hand caught my shoulder. I spun, swung wild. My fist connected with the tall woman's jaw. She went down hard, but the warehouse man was right behind her. His weight slammed into me. We both hit the ground, rolling through pine needles and dirt. His hands found my throat. Story block 6. I drove my knee upward. It connected with soft tissue. His grip loosened enough for me to wrench sideways, gulping air that tasted of copper and earth. Pine needles stuck to my palms as I scrambled away on all fours, my throat already swelling where his fingers had pressed. He recovered faster than I'd hoped. His boot caught my hip, spinning me onto my back. Stars exploded across my vision as my head cracked against exposed root. Through the ringing in my ears, I heard Lorraine's voice somewhere close, directing the others like she was coordinating a business meeting. "Pin her arms. Don't let her get to the road." The warehouse man dropped his full weight onto my chest. Air punched from my lungs. I bucked, twisted, managed to get one arm free and raked my nails down his cheek. He roared, reared back. Blood welled in dark lines across his face. I used the momentum to roll, got my feet under me, lunged deeper into the trees. Low-hanging branches became weapons I couldn't avoid. One caught my forehead, another my collarbone. Warm blood trickled into my left eye. I wiped at it with my sleeve, still running, my breath coming in ragged gasps that echoed the pulse hammering in my temples. The ground sloped downward without warning. My feet went out from under me. I slid 10 feet on my back, grabbing at saplings and undergrowth that tore loose in my hands. At the bottom, I crashed into a dry creek bed, rocks digging into my spine. I lay there for 3 seconds, maybe 5, listening. Footsteps crunched through dead leaves to my right. More movement to my left. They were flanking me, spreading out in a semicircle. Professional, practiced. This wasn't improvised. They'd planned for resistance. A snapped twig 20 yards upslope. I forced myself upright, ignoring the sharp pain in my ribs where they'd hit the rocks. The creek bed ran northeast, away from the industrial park. I followed it at a crouch, trying to minimize sound, but every step seemed impossibly loud. She went down the ravine. The tall woman's voice, clear and calm despite the blow I'd landed. No anger, no frustration, just efficiency. I moved faster, abandoning stealth for speed. The creek bed narrowed, forcing me to climb the bank. Tree roots provided handholds, but the soil crumbled under my weight. I hauled myself up using a sapling that bent alarmingly but held. At the top, I paused, scanning the darkness. Chain-link fence, 15 feet high, stretched in both directions. Industrial lot on the other side. Sodium lights illuminating rows of shipping containers. My reflection stared back from the metal diamonds of the fence, blood-streaked and wild-eyed. Beyond the containers, traffic hummed on what had to be the main road. Behind me, the pursuit sounds grew closer. I ran along the fence line, searching for a gate, a gap, anything. The fence terminated at a concrete wall where the property met an overpass. Dead end. I spun back, measuring distances, calculating odds. The tall woman emerged from the tree line first. She moved with athletic grace, no trace of injury from where I'd hit her. The warehouse man came next, one hand pressed to his bleeding face, the other holding something that glinted in the ambient light. Lorraine appeared last, picking her way through the underbrush with careful steps, her phone's screen casting blue light on her features. "There's nowhere left to go," Lorraine said, her voice carrying that same reasonable tone she'd used in 10 years of friendship. "We're not going to hurt you. We just need you to understand your situation." I backed against the fence, metal biting into my shoulders through my torn shirt. The warehouse man shifted his grip on whatever he was holding. A tire iron, I realized. My ribs throbbed where I'd hit the creek bed. Blood continued dripping from my forehead into my eye. "Understand what?" My voice came out rough, damaged from the choking. "That you're going to frame me for threatening Marcus? That you've been setting me up for months?" "Not months." Lorraine pocketed her phone. 18 months. Since you told me about the Henderson account irregularities. You were always too honest, June, too principled. It made you a liability." The tall woman had circled to my left, cutting off any angle toward the trees. Her stance suggested training, security work, maybe military. She held her hands loose at her sides, ready. "Marcus needed someone to take the fall for the embezzlement," Lorraine continued. $3 million from 6 different clients. The auditors are scheduled for next month. Your voice on tape, threatening him, harassing him, demanding money. It builds a perfect narrative. unstable employee, passed over for promotion, trying to extort the senior partner. My fingers found the chain link behind me, gripping the cold metal. The recordings are edited. Prove it. Before your trial, before Marcus testifies about your threats, your erratic behavior, your jealousy of his success. She smiled again, that stranger's expression on familiar features. By the time you convince anyone to examine the audio forensics, you'll have already been convicted of assault, extortion, maybe attempted murder. Depends how well Marcus sells it on the stand. The warehouse man stepped closer, adjusting his grip on the tire iron. The tall woman matched his movement from the other side. They were closing the box, eliminating my options one by one. "Roberto?" Lorraine said, nodding to the warehouse man. "Make sure she understands this isn't negotiable." He swung the tire iron in a lazy arc, testing its weight. I measured the distance to Lorraine, calculated the odds of reaching her before the other two intercepted me. Not good, not remotely good, but staying pinned against the fence was choosing defeat. I pushed off the chain link, driving forward toward Lorraine with everything left in my battered body. I made it 3 steps before Roberto's tire iron caught me across the shoulders. The impact drove me sideways into the pavement, grinding gravel into my palms and knees. White light exploded behind my eyes. My arms buckled, barely keeping my face from smashing into the ground. The tall woman's boot pressed between my shoulder blades, pinning me flat. I tasted blood and asphalt, felt the grit embedding itself in my torn skin. My briefcase had tumbled somewhere beyond reach, its contents spilling across the parking lot. "Check her phone." Lorraine's voice came from above, still calm, still measured. "And get the briefcase. Everything." Hands yanked my phone from my jacket pocket. Other hands rifled through my fallen briefcase, scattering papers that caught the wind and skittered across the lot. The pressure on my back increased until my ribs creaked, forcing the air from my lungs in sharp gasps. "She's got nothing useful here," Roberto said, his voice tight with disgust. "Bank statements, some legal pad with notes, no recordings, no evidence." "The cloud," the tall woman said. "Check her cloud storage." My phone's screen glowed as they forced my face toward it, trying to use facial recognition to unlock it. I squeezed my eyes shut, turning my head despite the boot grinding harder against my spine. The pavement scraped my cheek raw. "Stubborn!" Lorraine crouched beside me, her perfume sickeningly familiar. "You really think you can protect whatever pitiful evidence you've gathered? We own the law firm's IT system, June. Every email you sent, every document you copied, every search you ran, we've already scrubbed it." She grabbed my hair, wrenching my head back at an angle that sent lightning down my neck. My eyes watered, but I kept them locked on her face, memorizing every detail of this woman who'd worn friendship like a mask for 18 months. "The partner meeting is in 90 minutes, Lorraine continued. "Marcus is already there, rehearsing his testimony about your instability. By noon tomorrow, you'll be arrested. By next week, you'll be facing federal charges." She released my hair, letting my face drop back toward the pavement. "Or you can sign the confession we've prepared. Take responsibility for the embezzlement, agree to repay it over time, and we'll recommend a suspended sentence. You'd only serve 6 months. The boot lifted from my back. I sucked in air, tasting copper and exhaust fumes. My whole body screamed in protest as I pushed up to my hands and knees. Blood dripped from my nose, spattering the concrete in dark dots. 6 months, I managed, spitting red. "While you steal $3 million. While we redistribute capital that was already earmarked for reinvestment," Lorraine corrected. "The clients won't lose anything. The firm's insurance covers it." Everyone wins except you. Roberto moved closer, the tire iron dangling from his hand. The tall woman circled to my other side, boxing me in again. They'd choreographed this, practiced the movements until they flowed like a dance. I wondered how many other people they'd trapped in this parking lot, in this same position. My legs shook as I forced myself upright. Standing took everything left in my reserve tank. The warehouse behind them stretched into darkness, its loading dock empty except for a single flickering security light. No cameras visible, no witnesses. They'd chosen well. "Show her," Lorraine said. The tall woman pulled out a tablet, swiping through screens until she found what she wanted. She thrust it toward my face. Video footage filled the display. Me outside Marcus's house 3 nights ago, standing by his mailbox, looking up at his windows. The timestamp showed 11:47 p.m. "Stalking," Lorraine narrated. "Combine that with the threatening audio recordings, the unauthorized access to client accounts, the pattern of harassment his secretary will testify to." She smiled. "You're going to prison regardless. The only question is whether you go away for 6 months or 6 years. The tablet showed more footage. Me following Marcus to his car last Tuesday. Me waiting outside the coffee shop he frequented. Me sitting in my car across from the office at dawn. Every image carefully selected, context stripped away, innocent actions transformed into evidence of obsession. My stomach twisted. I'd been documenting Marcus's meetings with suspicious clients, tracking his movements to prove his involvement in the money laundering scheme I'd discovered buried in the quarterly reports. But without the context of those reports, without the evidence I'd been gathering, the surveillance looked exactly like what Lorraine described. "The confession is in my car," Lorraine said. "Sign it, and this ends. Refuse, and Roberto makes sure you're too injured to attend that partner meeting. Either way, we win." She turned toward the parking lot entrance where a black sedan waited, engine running. The warehouse security light flickered again, casting her shadow long and distorted across the pavement. Roberto shifted his weight, ready to move. I measured the distance to the loading dock, the angle to the street beyond, the time it would take to reach either. My body catalog of injuries ran long: bruised ribs, bleeding nose, shredded palms, wrenched shoulder. But I'd run marathons through worse pain, finished races with stress fractures and torn ligaments because stopping meant admitting defeat. The tall woman's phone buzzed. She checked it, frowned. "We've got a problem." "What problem?" Lorraine's voice sharpened. "Marcus says someone's asking questions at the firm. One of the junior associates found discrepancies in the client accounts, took them straight to the ethics committee." Lorraine's mask cracked. Just for a second, just long enough for me to see the panic underneath. She'd built this frame so carefully, timed everything perfectly, and now some unknown associate had pulled a thread she hadn't secured. That second of distraction was all I needed. I lunged not toward escape, but toward the tall woman's hand, the one holding my phone. My fingers closed around it as she jerked back, but momentum carried us both sideways. We hit the ground together, her elbow catching my temple, my knee driving into her ribs. The phone skittered across the concrete as we rolled, her fingernails raking down my forearm hard enough to draw blood. I twisted away and scrambled on hands and knees toward where the device had landed near a rusted storm drain. My ribs screamed with each breath, but I pushed through the pain, fingers outstretched. Roberto's boot came down inches from my hand. I yanked back and swept my leg around, catching his ankle. He stumbled, but didn't fall, and Lorraine was already moving, closing the distance between us with calculated strides. The tall woman grabbed a fistful of my jacket and hauled backward, throwing me off balance. I went with the momentum instead of fighting it, rolling onto my back and kicking upward. My heel connected with her knee, and she dropped with a sharp gasp. The phone lay 3 feet away, screen glowing in the darkness. I lunged for it again, fingers brushing the case just as Lorraine's shoe pinned my wrist to the ground. "Enough!" She pressed down harder, grinding bone against concrete. "This is pathetic, June!" I grabbed her ankle with my free hand and twisted. She lost her footing, and I rolled, snatching the phone before pushing to my feet. My vision swam, dark spots blooming at the edges, but I could see the lock screen clearly. 17 missed calls. 23 text messages. Someone was looking for me. Roberto moved to block the path to the street. Behind me, the tall woman was getting up, limping but functional. Lorraine straightened her blazer, that cold mask back in place, but her breathing came too fast. She was rattled. I backed toward the loading dock, thumbing the phone's emergency call button. The screen lit up with the SOS prompt. One more tap, and it would connect to dispatch. Start broadcasting my location. "You make that call, we disappear," Lorraine said, "and every copy of those recordings goes public. Your clients, your colleagues, everyone you've ever worked with will hear exactly what you said about them." My thumb hovered over the screen. She was bluffing. Had to be. The recordings were her leverage, her insurance policy. Without them, she had nothing. But the certainty in her voice made me hesitate. The tall woman pulled something from her pocket, not a weapon, a small drive labeled with my initials. "Backups everywhere," she said. "Cloud storage, encrypted servers, 3 different countries. We've been planning this for 18 months. 18 months. Long before our partnership talks started. Long before I'd confided anything sensitive. They'd targeted me, researched me, built an entire operation around destroying my credibility and stealing my client list. I thought about the junior associate the tall woman had mentioned, the one who'd found discrepancies. Someone at the firm was already questioning the narrative Lorraine had constructed. If I disappeared tonight, if I didn't show up to defend myself, that would only confirm their suspicions. Roberto edged closer, hands raised like he was approaching a cornered animal. The warehouse security light flickered again, and in that strobe of darkness, I saw my opening, a gap between him and the chain-link fence, narrow but navigable if I moved fast enough. I faked left toward the loading dock. Roberto took the bait, shifting his weight to cut me off. I pivoted hard right and ran straight at the fence, phone clutched against my chest. My shoulder hit the chain link and I started climbing, feet scrabbling for purchase on the narrow metal diamonds. Hands grabbed my legs. I kicked backward, felt my heel connect with something soft. The grip loosened and I pulled myself higher, arms burning with the effort. The fence top bit into my palms through the shredded skin, but I threw myself over anyway, landing hard on the other side. Gravel bit into my knees. I pushed up and ran, legs pumping despite the pain radiating from every joint. Behind me, footsteps pounded and voices shouted, but I'd gained precious seconds. The street ahead gleamed with late-night traffic, witnesses, and cameras in safety. A car engine roared to life. The black sedan swung around the corner, headlights pinning me like a spotlight. I cut left into an alley, shoulder scraping brick as I navigated the narrow passage. Dumpsters lined one wall, fire escapes zigzagged overhead. The sedan couldn't follow here, but Roberto could. His footsteps echoed behind me, closer than they should be. My lungs burned, my vision tunneled, but the alley exit glowed ahead. Another street, more lights, a convenience store with its neon sign blazing. I burst out onto the sidewalk and nearly collided with a couple walking their dog. They jumped back, startled, and I kept moving, crossing against traffic toward the store entrance. Inside, fluorescent lights hummed overhead. A tired clerk looked up from his magazine. I locked the door behind me and stumbled to the counter, holding up my phone. "Call the police," I gasped. "Please." The clerk's eyes widened as he took in my torn clothes and bloodied hands. He reached for the phone beneath the counter while I backed against the wall of refrigerated drinks, watching the door. The cold glass pressed through my shirt, grounding me in the moment. Roberto appeared at the entrance, his face pressed against the glass. His fist pounded once, twice. The sound reverberated through the small store. He didn't try the handle. He knew I'd locked it. Instead, he simply stood there, staring at me with those dark eyes that had once belonged to my closest friend. My phone buzzed in my pocket. I pulled it out with trembling fingers, expecting another threat. But it was a message from Detective Hayes, the officer I'd contacted 3 days ago when I first discovered what Roberto had been doing. The text was brief. "Got the warrant. Moving now." I raised my eyes from the screen. Roberto's expression had changed. He'd seen something in my face, some flicker of relief I couldn't suppress. His jaw tightened, and he stepped back from the glass. For a moment, I thought he might walk away, disappear into the night like he'd threatened to do 100 times, taking all my secrets with him. Instead, he pulled out his own phone. His thumb moved across the screen, deliberate and slow. My phone buzzed again. A video file. I knew what it contained. My voice, raw and unfiltered, discussing the medical mistake I'd made 15 years ago. The one that had cost a patient their mobility. The one I'd confessed to Roberto during a particularly difficult night, when the guilt had become unbearable. The clerk spoke rapid Spanish into his phone, giving the address. Police dispatch, I realized. My backup plan was working, even if it felt like every cell in my body wanted to run. Roberto's fingers hovered over his screen. Send or delete. I could see the decision playing out across his features. 3 months of friendship turned to manipulation. 6 weeks of recorded conversations. Countless hours of me trusting him with my deepest failures, never knowing he'd planted recording devices in my home, my car, even my office. Red and blue lights flashed through the store windows. 2 patrol cars pulled up to the curb, followed by an unmarked sedan. Detective Hayes emerged from the sedan, her gray suit jacket catching the streetlight. She moved with purpose toward Roberto, badge already visible in her hand. I watched him make his choice. His thumb descended toward the screen, but Hayes was faster. My hand clamped around his wrist, twisting his arm behind his back in one fluid motion. His phone clattered to the sidewalk. Another officer retrieved it, sealing it in an evidence bag before Roberto could protest. The clerk unlocked the door. Cold night air rushed in, carrying the sound of Hayes reading Roberto his rights. Her voice was steady, professional, each word sharp as broken glass. Roberto didn't resist. His shoulders slumped forward, the fight draining from his body as handcuffs clicked into place. Hayes looked through the doorway at me. "Ms. Butler, we need you to come down to the station." I nodded, pushing away from the refrigerator wall. My legs threatened to give out, but I forced them to hold. Through the glass, I watched officers guide Roberto into the back of a patrol car. His head turned, eyes finding mine one last time. No anger there now, just resignation. The recording devices Hayes' team had planted in Roberto's apartment had captured everything. His late-night calls to my former colleagues, threatening to expose me unless they paid him. His spreadsheet of potential buyers for the information. Most damning, his own recorded confession to his girlfriend about the elaborate scheme, how he'd befriended me specifically because he'd heard rumors about my past. I stepped onto the sidewalk, wrapping my arms around myself against the chill. Hayes stood beside me, watching the patrol car pull away. "The recordings he made of you," she said quietly. "We've secured all his devices. They'll be destroyed after the trial. Nothing gets out." My throat tightened. I should have reported the mistake years ago. I should have. "You should have," Hayes agreed. "But blackmail isn't justice. What he did was criminal." An ambulance arrived, summoned by the clerk. Paramedics approached with their kit, gesturing to my hands, my scraped knees. I let them guide me to the back of the vehicle, let them clean and bandage the wounds I'd acquired climbing that fence. The physical injuries would heal quickly. The others would take longer. But as I sat there, watching the patrol car's taillights disappear around a corner, I felt something shift inside my chest. The weight I'd carried for 15 years hadn't vanished. It never would. But Roberto's hold on me, that suffocating grip of fear he'd cultivated so carefully, had finally broken. 6 months later, I pulled into the community center parking lot at 7:30, the morning sun casting long shadows across the cracked asphalt. My hands rested steady on the steering wheel. No trembling, no hesitation. The building before me stood modest and worn, its brick facade faded by decades of Chicago weather, but the banner stretched across the entrance blazed with fresh paint. Financial Literacy Workshop. Free for all. Inside, folding chairs scraped against linoleum as people settled into rows. I counted 32 faces, mostly women, mostly my age or older. Their expressions held the same wariness I'd carried for 15 years. That look of people who'd learned to guard their secrets, to shrink themselves small. Setting my laptop on the podium, I connected the projector cable and watched the first slide illuminate the screen. Understanding Your Rights. Financial Privacy and Protection. My presentation, refined over 6 months of similar workshops across 3 cities. "Good morning," I said, my voice carrying without strain. "I'm here to talk about something most financial institutions won't discuss openly. How to recognize when someone's using your information against you." A woman in the 3rd row leaned forward, gripping her purse strap. Another near the back pulled out a notebook, pen already moving across the page. I clicked to the next slide, bullet points listing warning signs. But instead of reading them verbatim, I walked around the podium, meeting eyes throughout the room. 7 months ago, someone I trusted recorded my private conversations. He used information about a mistake I'd made years earlier, a mistake that cost someone money, a mistake I'd tried to bury instead of address. And he threatened to destroy what remained of my career unless I gave him what he wanted. The room went completely silent. Even the rustling of coats and bags ceased. I'm telling you this because silence is how blackmail works. Shame is the currency, and secrecy is the vault where they keep you locked. I advanced the slide, showing a flowchart of reporting procedures. The person who tried to blackmail me is currently serving 18 months in Cook County Jail. The mistake I made? I reported it to the proper authorities. I paid restitution with interest, and I'm working with regulatory boards to create better protocols for handling financial errors. My fingers moved across the keyboard, opening a video file. Hayes appeared on screen, her detective's badge visible, explaining victim resources in her characteristic measured tone. We'd recorded it last month specifically for these workshops. For the next 90 minutes, I walked them through scenarios. How to document threats, which agencies to contact, how to secure digital communications. I distributed folders containing templates, hotline numbers, legal aid contacts. The materials had cost me $3,000 to print and organize, funded entirely from my savings, but watching hands reach out to take them made every dollar worthwhile. During the break, a woman approached my table. Silver hair pulled back tight, hands weathered from years of work. "That mistake you mentioned," she said softly. "How did you survive people knowing?" I closed my laptop, giving her my full attention. Some people cut ties. Some couldn't look at me the same way. But the ones who mattered stuck around, and I found new people who knew the whole truth from the start. She nodded slowly, her fingers tracing the edge of my information folder. "Whatever you're carrying," I continued, "it's probably not as catastrophic as your fear makes it feel. And even if it is, you're stronger than the secret." After the workshop ended, I stayed an additional hour answering individual questions. One man showed me threatening text messages on his phone. I photographed them and gave him Detective Hayes's direct number. A younger woman described a supervisor holding her immigration paperwork hostage. I connected her with an attorney from my new network. By noon, the community center had emptied. I packed my materials methodically, coiling cables, stacking handouts, wiping down the podium. The janitor mopped near the entrance, his radio playing low. My phone buzzed with a text from Patricia, my former colleague who'd chosen to maintain contact after everything surfaced. "Lunch next week? Want to hear how the workshop went?" I typed back a quick confirmation, then scrolled through my calendar. 3 more presentations scheduled this month. 1 in Milwaukee, 2 in different Chicago neighborhoods. The consulting work I'd picked up paid the bills, but these workshops fed something deeper. Outside, I loaded boxes into my trunk and paused before closing it. The sky stretched cloudless and blue, the kind of crisp autumn day that made the city feel full of possibility instead of threat. My reflection in the car window showed new lines around my eyes, gray threading more prominently through my hair, but my shoulders sat straight, my jaw unclenched. The drive home took 40 minutes through lunch traffic. I'd moved to a smaller apartment in Pilsen, trading square footage for a neighborhood where nobody knew my history, where I could rebuild without constantly encountering ghosts. My building had a corner store that sold fresh produce, a laundromat where people actually conversed, and a park where I'd started running again. Inside my apartment, I kicked off my shoes and went straight to the corkboard mounted in my kitchen. Workshop feedback forms covered half the surface. Handwritten notes thanking me, asking for follow-up resources, sharing their own stories. I pinned up the attendance sheet from this morning. 32 names representing 32 people who now knew they didn't have to carry their burdens alone. My laptop opened to 3 new emails. One from the Chicago Bar Association, confirming my speaking slot at their ethics conference. Another from a nonprofit requesting collaboration on their financial abuse prevention program. The third from a producer at a local radio station, asking if I'd be willing to discuss blackmail prevention on air. I answered all 3 affirmatively. The afternoon stretched ahead with no appointments, no obligations. I changed into running clothes and headed to the park, my feet finding their rhythm on the gravel path circling the field. Other runners passed, some nodding in recognition. I'd become a regular fixture here, the woman who showed up regardless of weather. 3 miles became 4, became 5. My lungs burned pleasantly, my muscles warming against the cool air. When I finally stopped, sweat soaking my shirt, I felt the exhaustion that comes from effort rather than fear. That evening, I made dinner, roasted vegetables and rice, and ate at my small table while reading through proposed legislation about mandatory reporting of financial irregularities. The regulations needed work, needed input from people who understood both the systems and their failures. I drafted an email to the state representative sponsoring the bill, offering my perspective. Before bed, I stood at my window looking out over the neighborhood. Lights glowed in apartment windows. A couple walked their dog down the sidewalk. Music drifted from somewhere nearby, someone's celebration carrying into the night. Tomorrow, I'd wake up and do it again. The consulting work, the workshop planning, the slow rebuilding of a life I'd almost let someone else destroy. Not the life I'd had before, when perfection was the armor I wore and secrets were the price of maintaining it. Something different, something honest. My phone chimed one final time. Hayes, checking in as she did periodically. Hope the workshop went well. I smiled, typing back. It did. Thank you for everything. Her response came quickly. You did the hard part. I set the phone down and turned off the light, climbing into bed as the city hummed its familiar nighttime rhythm around me. Sleep came easily now, uninterrupted by anxiety, untroubled by the weight of what someone might reveal. The truth had already been told. Did you like my story? And which city are you listening from? Let's meet in the comments. If you like the story, you can support me by sending a super thanks so I can keep bringing more stories like this. Thank you so much for your sweet support. I'm looking forward to your comments on the story. On the screen, you can see 2 new life stories that I highly recommend. There's so much more on my channel. Don't forget to subscribe. See you in the next life story. With love and respect.